Good evening, everybody. It's 6:30. I'd like to welcome you to the Audit and Accounts meeting this evening. I'll start with the housekeeping procedures. There's no fire alarms scheduled for this evening, so if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the side of the room. Exit through reception and meet in the War Memorial Park. This meeting is being webcast live on the internet and will be available to view on YouTube after the meeting. Microphones, can I please remind members and officers that in order to be heard clearly within the room by those present and on the webcast, that you must speak directly into your microphone. The microphone stem can be moved so it's close as possible. And mobile phones, please switch your phones off or to silent. That's good. So, first on the agenda, we have apologies for absence and substitutions. I have received apologies for absence from Councillor Chatburn, and I also have apologies from Councillor Watts, and Councillor Phillimore is here, and welcome back, Councillor Phillimore, as substitute. Second item on the agenda, I have declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? I don't see any. I'll move on to item 3, urgent matters. No one's brought any urgent matters to my attention, so I'm looking around and there's none. So moving on to item 4 of the agenda, minutes of the meeting held on 10th of February. Does the committee agree that the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of February are an accurate record? Agreed, that's agreed. If you just give me a second, I will initial the pages for Democratic Services. Thanks, Rob. We move on to item 5 of the agenda, update on data breaches reported to the Information Commissioner's Office under UK GDPR. I will ask Anne Greaves to introduce the report. Anne.
Thank you, Chair. The report relates to just one breach that we've had in 2024 in September, relating to the sending of 2 housing benefit letters with details of the claimant's new address to her ex-partner's address. What had happened was that when she moved out, she gave a care of address because she was planning to move back to the property in the short term. She never moved back, and the care of address was left on the system, and the error came to light some 4 years later when the benefit claim was reviewed. She was concerned that her ex-partner, who had a history of domestic violence against her, would now have details of her new address. Further inquiries were made to assess the level of the risk, which showed that there was domestic violence going back 2013 to 14, and that she had a child with her ex-partner who was banned from seeing the child and lived in a foreign country. Because of that, it was considered there was a high risk of the consequence of the perpetrator maybe opening the letters and obtaining the new address, so it was reported to the Information Commissioner. We have, since this report was written, have received a response from the ICO. They've decided to take no further action because they're happy that we've taken sufficient action ourselves. In particular, they asked us to undertake an audit, which we were going to do anyway, of care of addresses throughout the service, and that's been done so that a similar incident shouldn't arise in respect of anybody else. They also noted that we put in place remedial action and asked the data subject to contact us if she felt that her safety was at risk. They made a number of recommendations, which are the usual ones about reviewing policies and offering training to officers and following up on the breach after the event. Happy to take any questions.
Does anybody have any questions? I don't see any, so I think we are to note the contents of the report. Thank you, Anne, for following that through. Yeah, we'll note the contents of the report. We agreed? Thank you. We'll move on to item 6, the viewing of social networking sites. And again, I'll ask Officer Anne Greaves to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. The report is the usual report that you receive 6 monthly. It covers the period from the 1st of July 2024 to the 1st of March 2025, and it's about RIPA authorisation. So there have been 3 viewings during that period. They're set out in paragraph 2.2, and all the viewings were by the accountant fraud and insurance team. And the reasons for those viewings are set out in the purpose column. Again, happy to take any questions.
Does anybody have any questions on the social networking site viewings? I'm seeing shaking heads, so no questions. I think this is another one that we are asked to... does the committee agree... Oh, wrong one. Does the committee agree to note the contents of the report? They do, thank you. Thank you, Anne. I think that's your job done for the evening. And you're welcome to stay, of course. We'll move on to agenda item 7, internal audit progress report. I'll ask Richard Bevan to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is the progress report for the work completed by the internal audit team between December last year and March this year, and also includes the current position concerning outstanding audit recommendations. Reports in the usual format, so paragraph 3.1 on page 20 shows the audits that we completed this time round that have received either a reasonable or limited assurance, and these full reports are shown in appendices 1 to 3. Then the table on paragraph 3.2 on pages 21 and 22 shows the other completed audits that gave either a full or substantial assurance. For those ones we've just given you like the key points from those audits. Also with recommendations, paragraph 4.1 it summarises the position of the recommendations. So the overdue recommendations are shown in appendix 4, and the remaining recommendations are shown in appendix 5. What we've added to the report this time round in paragraph 4.3 on page 23 is a heat map to give the committee hopefully a more pictorial view of the situation of the recommendations. So the further kind of right you go on that grid, the hotter it gets, therefore the more overdue the recommendations are. And those recommendations, they tie up to the recommendations in the appendices, but happy to clarify anything the committee wishes to on that. The only other thing I was going to add was concerning appendix 1 on parking services. That was the one that received the limited assurance, which we completed that just before Christmas. Since then, we have had extensive meetings with relevant officers, and the report in my appendix there shows the current position with the recommendations. So it shows where probably at least half of the recommendations have now been noted as complete, or they've got revised completion dates where we've agreed additional work. So we've had meetings regularly with the officers. So we're happy that despite the limited assurance given back in December, we're happy that the progress is being made towards managing those weaknesses we identified in the control environment. So yeah, the report's just for noting. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for taking the time to address and improve the layout to make it even more accessible for us in that respect. What I would just say on the heat map is, just for other councillors' benefit, there's obviously that sea of red there. That's a lot of red buckets that have no items in them, rather than them being red because they've got overdue items in them. And if anyone has any questions, or Councillor Isaac.
Yeah, I have to say that reading the report on the parking services, I was rather concerned about what I saw there. It seems to me that the department's got considerable problems, staffing problems, leadership problems, systems problems, problems pursuing cases against parking offenders, problems recovering debts. So I came away thinking there's some deep-seated problems with this team, and I'd be interested to know who's actually the most senior officer responsible for the team. I'm not it's not as a witch hunt. We're here to understand issues and to see what can be done to help them and to voice our concerns, so that senior leadership in the organisation recognises that elected representatives are concerned about what is happening here. And I saw this evening that there's a vehicle abandoned outside a village in my ward, Old Burclare, which has been abandoned with a sign on it saying that Basingstoke and Dean Parking Department is aware that there's an abandoned vehicle. There's a window open. I was surprised that the birds haven't started nesting in it. It's been there that long. It must be 6 weeks that it's been abandoned on the verge, and that's not a good message to send out to our residents, that's something so prominent as that has still not been dealt with. So I don't know if there's anything you can say to me or the rest of the committee about the extent of the problems and the extent to which they've now been that actions have been put in place to remedy them.
Yeah, sure. So the parking services manager reports to the regulatory services manager, reports to the head of environmental services, and then reports to the director of environmental regulatory services. So in our discussions that we've had, I've been liaising with every tier. So the director has been involved with the progress of the recommendations as well. I think had we completed this report last month, there would be no progress on those recommendations. Regarding the specific abandoned vehicle, obviously I'm not aware of the details, but we can find out, I'm sure. But the director has been heavily involved in the progress of the recommendations. Yes, there have been resourcing issues in the past. Whether there are, I think they're down a resource, but I'm not 100% sure. They recruited new resource before Christmas, so I appreciate that it takes time to get up to speed. But the progress which they've made against those recommendations, as I said earlier, to date, does show they are making inroads into them, and obviously we'll continue to monitor the recommendations until they're complete.
Councillor Isaac, you have a...
Yeah, so that's, thank you. Can we just identify that the names of the officers directly responsible for this in terms of the chain of command? That would be helpful. And also, I suppose with my other hat on as chairman of the resources committee, whether there are any KPIs for this department that we need to be looking for in the future, because I'm not aware of any.
Perhaps we want to invite the officer responsible for the Park Service Department to the next audit committee meeting, by which time they've already crossed half the recommendations off. They might have crossed another 30-40% of them off, and or it might act as an impetus to get even more of them crossed off the list. Would that be okay, Councillor Isaac?
Very good suggestion, Chair.
Okay.
I've just add to that, Chair. I think, as Richard said, we're happy with the progress that's been made against these recommendations, and we're comfortable that they are being dealt with seriously, which is why we suggested that the relevant head of service wasn't on standby today, because it's a positive picture from where we were in December. If those recommendations hadn't been signed off, we'd have obviously had the head of service here today, but we're comfortable progress if that gives any comfort to the committee.
Okay, I think it's interesting as well, isn't it, that it's an area that wasn't audited last year, and so that creep, if you like, has slipped in over 2 years. I mean, obviously we've talked before, haven't we, about the resource available to the internal audit team and what they choose to do, and we've got it on the agenda later to look at the audit plan for the coming year. So I think we should extend an invitation to the head of parking services and/or the director responsible for the next meeting, and we can see where we are, and perhaps if they want to have a chat with me before the meeting as well, then I can we can do it that way. Councillor Tastain, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to ask when if the cause of some of this stuff might not be just around the management, but possibly to do with the transference of the agency agreement to Hampshire, and when that happened, and whether that might have had an impact on staff morale. It might have been the way it was the transfer across impacted it, and how the department was run, and whether there's anything around that could possibly put a finger on it. And if there is there any lessons learned being done around potential transfers out of departments and at places, things like this?
I mean, obviously Hampshire took over the on-street parking, didn't they? So, which left the off-street parking with the with our wardens. Regards to impact, I would have thought that would have probably freed up, made more resource available, but they were literally down to bare bones on resources. And at the point when we came in to do the audit, they were just in the process of recruiting the new member of staff. So it was fair play to the officers at the time. The time we came in was probably not ideal, but at least we were able to we've highlighted the issues and then help them with stuff going forward. The actual impact on morale and stuff, I wouldn't be able to comment on that.
And the other bit is about lessons learned. So when we do transfers out and things like that, was there anything done around that? And if not, is that sort of being picked up?
That lessons learned, not in the scope of the audit we did. As with regards to transfer, we were just looking at the existing arrangements that they had. And obviously we've done previously as well, and we've had similar levels of assurance. So obviously there's been an ongoing problem, but it does seem, with the progress, again, sorry to repeat myself, but the progress they've made in the last 4 months does show improvement. We obviously just need to make sure that it doesn't slip back again going forward.
We could. I'm just wondering who we can ask the question of, who the best person to ask the question of about lessons learned, whether we go via an officer or whether we would go to the chair of resident services. And I don't know. That's you, isn't it? Yeah, it is you. And we've got the head of scrutiny, the chair of scrutiny here as well. Councillor Bound.
I was just going to add, because there's something, isn't there, that says in this particular example it was a transfer out, but with local government reorganisation just round the corner, we know those staff changes are something that we absolutely have to have bottomed out. So I think that it does become incredibly important. Where does it go becomes an interesting question, Chair.
I'm happy for people to have a think about it. Councillor Phillimore, I was going to say I'm happy for people to have a think about it and bring it up later if they have a brainwave.
I get that I'm a not very frequent visitor, but it's not just the officers, is it? We seem to have trouble with some of these contracts. Planet, Flowbird, they're all. I mean, some of them are completed, but it does seem to think that these contractors are not doing their job properly.
I think the question is, thank you, Councillor Phillimore. It's a fair point. I think the question splits into two, doesn't it? One is questions to be directed to the director and/or officer responsible for parking services about contractors and lessons learned in that respect. But I think there is a bigger strategic question about how we, as an organisation, learn from these contract handovers so that we are perhaps better prepared. I think what's really, I'm going to ask a question of Paul and/or Richard actually, but I think what's reassuring is that we don't get many of these audits come past us with limited assurance. So this is quite unusual for this committee. But my question is, if you were rewriting the audit report now, knowing what you now know about the number of items that have been closed off, would that still be limited assurance, or would it be a different outcome?
I think if it was looking at it now, there's still a couple of fundamental recommendations in there. So it would probably still be reasonable assurance, possibly substantial. No, I'd say it'd have to be reasonable. If there's fundamental recommendations in our report, then we kind of make it a reasonable assurance thing, because we wouldn't be doing our job properly if we made it any different, to be honest.
So it would have moved from limited to reasonable in your view?
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions on this particular piece of the internal audit? No. Okay. So I think we've got a couple of actions from that, Phil, which we'll pick up and get in the minutes and get onto the action log. Any questions on the rest of the internal audit paper? Richard Harwood.
Just a very minor one on, it's page 59, I think, audit reference 12 creditors. I must have missed this, I think, when you did the original audit, if it was only October 24, but possibly it was generally substantially good. But I have as a section 151, I have a career-long hatred of payment cards. And I wondered whether when you did the audit there was actually any evidence of there was a quantified loss in terms of VAT not recovered, and whether this was a detailed audit into payment cards, or when did you last do a detailed audit into payment cards in the authority? I think they're a big risk. That's the problem.
There was a value that we identified in our sample testing. I would have to come back to the committee to confirm that. It was a couple of £1,000, but not, can argue materiality, but it was still a couple of grand. And with regards to sort of the risk of doing an audit, we've actually, as you'll see in Paul's audit strategy, we've separated out the procurement card audit from the creditors audit. So going forward, we'll treat that separately, because it has been a recurring finding the last couple of years. No matter how diligent our Exchequer services officers are in chasing for receipts for cards, it can be problematic in getting receipts from some officers. Has been an issue, yes.
Do you mind, John, if I just let Adam say his piece on that, and then?
I echo your concerns, Richard, around payment cards. It's something that we've reduced the numbers since I've been here. There are reasons for it, particularly around some of the bed and breakfast and that, but where there are sort of corporate accounts and things like that, we do try and encourage that and really do push back, and we are being quite challenging of repeat offenders who aren't providing that information, and are cancelling cards where they're not complying with what they're required to do. And we have reiterated that recently as well in terms of their responsibilities. But yes, I do agree they are a risk. Unfortunately, it's that there are sometimes needs for it, as much as I want to get rid of them completely.
But what happens when you cancel a card? Do then people have to submit expenses from their own cash?
It depends what they're purchasing. If it's their own sort of reclaiming of sort of subscriptions, things like that, I'd expect that to go through payroll anyway. This tends to be in operations if they're purchasing things from Screwfix or something like that for tools for the jobs. It's obviously not ideal to be doing it that way, where there are sort of corporate accounts that we can have, and stock management. But again, that's improved over recent times.
It's a recurring problem in many of the businesses I serve at work, so it's not unique to this council. But thank you for raising it, Richard. Councillor Isaac, you had a question?
I was reassured to hear from the Chief Financial Officer that he's seeking to reduce the number of credit cards or payment cards. But I'd just be interested to have some idea of how many of these are in circulation at the moment.
Off the top of my head, I wouldn't like to quote a number because I don't know, but there are sort of, I think it's around 20 or 30 at most. I think that it depends on service. Not all have them. I don't have one, for example, whereas my predecessor did, because I don't think I needed one. So we have reduced that number down. But as I say, in housing there are needs there for bed and breakfast emergency accommodation. Similarly, in some of the sort of emergency response where there's out of hours sort of things where they might be required to put people up in hotels, those sort of things. But again, they're not used that often. But I can get you a number. That's fine.
If we can add that to the action log, Phil, so that Adam will bring us a number back on that. Is that enough, Councillor Isaac? Or okay, great. Any other questions anybody has on this internal audit paper? Oh, Richard Harwood.
Just a very minor one, but on the ones that are red, like overdue by 4 months and 5 months and 6 months, I just wondered if you had any concerns about whether these were ever going to be dealt with before you do your next audit. 6 months is quite a long while to be waiting for a response, really.
Yes, it is. It is a concern, but we're also pleased. Years past, that number has been considerably more. So the overall number of recommendations in that bracket are considerably less than they have been. I certainly expect them all to be completed before the next audit. I can't remember the topics. I think they're kind of June, July time. So hopefully the next committee, I think next paper is June. There'll be progress on them. So I think some in relation to information and governance. So there'll be progress on them. You can't predict that it'll all be completed, but we'll, as part of our follow-up process, we'll chase every sort of 2 months to get an update. If there's obvious delays, then we will try and put pressure on the officers to give us to make more progress.
I just wonder whether the chairman of the Audit and Accounts Committee could urge some completion of these outstanding actions, whether that might be helpful.
It's a very good suggestion, Richard, and I was about to offer it. Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, just like to add in terms of audit recommendations, I'm not sure how many councillors are aware there's an improvement plan process going on at the moment, which each department has to create an improvement plan, and I'm pleased to say that audit recommendations is one of the tabs that that each head of service will have to complete on audit recommendations. So not only does it give sight to outstanding recommendations to audit committee, but it also gives it to SLT as well. So we've also got another process in place for pursuing outstanding recs, if that helps.
That's great. Thank you, Paul. Yes, Richard, I will follow up though, and I have done before, followed up on the HR ones, and I will do again. And I will follow up on the staffing question as well with the appropriate person. Thank you. I think we've done the item, haven't we? Are we finished with that? Everyone's nodding. So does the committee agree the report has been considered, commented on, and notes the contents of the report? Agreed. Marvellous. We'll move on to item 8, Internal Audit Plan 2025-26, and I'll ask Paul Gundry to introduce the report. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. This is one of the very few reports to bring to committee and ask for approval, so hopefully you will approve it for me. The report's broken down into 2 parts, the Internal Audit Charter and the Internal Audit Plan for 25-26. So if I start with the Charter, this is the framework for the conduct of internal audit, and the areas that's highlighted in that Charter is in paragraph 2.1.1 of my report on page 74. I've also attached the completed Charter, which I'm asking you to approve as Appendix 1, but I've also attached Appendix 2, a copy which has got highlighted changes. The changes are primarily job title changes from the charters approved this time last year, so hopefully there's no issues there. And then moving on to my audit plan, or did you want to take the Charter first and me to move on to the plan, or do you want me to carry on with?
As you wish, Paul.
Yeah. So if I move on to my plan, so I'm asking the committee to approve the internal audit plan for 25-26, which is Appendix 3, page 97. So taking on board comments made this time last year, I've included the number of days we set aside for each of those audits, and I've got the risk assessment categories for each of those audits there. But what I also have included in this report is my 3-year strategic plan. So it gives the committee, and this one's for information, I'm not asking for approval on the strategic plan. This just gives the committee information of the audits that if nothing changes, the audits will be carried out for the next 3 years. So you can look at, and that's on page 99, appendix 4. So you can see 25, 26 is highlighted there, but you've also got the 26, 27, 27, 28. And I think that probably takes us up to, anyway, I won't say that. So I wasn't going to add any more to that, Chair. Just over to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Tustain, you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question on the appendix 4 on the days because 26, 27 seems a lot heavier. I just wondered whether the resourcing will be adequate to get that all done.
So it's an additional 30 days. At this stage, I'm comfortable it will reduce the number of contingency days I would carry that year. But what I do tend to find is that each time I bring an audit plan to committee, it does change. So I am mindful of that, but I'm comfortable at the moment that it'll be okay.
Councillor Minsbound.
I was just going to do a bit of crystal ball gazing, if I may, Chair, for a moment, and ask some questions that sort of, we know all sorts of things around the corner, and just what would trigger changing and reviewing the priorities. You know, if we had, I don't know, a devolution bill come around the corner that was going to be published in the summer of 2025, say, which may become clearer through our crystal ball, and it turned around and said, you know, that there was going to be local government reorganisation that was going to start in 2028, which has an impact for us in May of 2027. That meant, you know what, I don't know, that you might merge districts before you took on all of the functions of a unitary. At what point would you trigger and review this and go, do you know what, there's a priority here that says there's some things that we need to keep an eye on, or create a report before, during or after we do some of that?
So I am a member of the statutory officers group, which is with the chief exec, the monitoring officer, and the chief financial officer. And there's those conversations there. So if I'm aware of something that comes up, it's in my power to change an audit plan, even if it's 25, 26. And if I do that, I will be coming to the committee to inform them that we've made an amendment to the audit plan. Now, whether that comes from my contingency or whether that means something else has to drop from my audit plan, the committee would be made aware of it.
Happy, Simon? Councillor Tustain.
So I was trying not to answer too many questions tonight, but in light of what Simon's just been talking about, if there's obviously going to be, you know, reorganisation, there's going to be potentially duplicate departments across into the new organisations. So will there be a level of looking into how things are run operationally and basically doing sort of like a take-on audit, which obviously would then potentially mean an awful lot more work. But I presume that the other bodies will therefore also have their internal auditors, so that means that's going to create quite a lot of upheaval from an audit department perspective. So I just wondered what the sort of conversation has been around that.
So at the moment, I haven't had those conversations around reorg because it's very, very high level from my perspective. I still need to provide an operational service as we go until I know there's going to be a change, because again, as you mentioned, there's a lot of crystal ball gazing, so I could make some decisions or assumptions which don't come to fruition, but I've got to ensure that, one, I'm still providing internal audit service to the organisation as well as to the audit committee. So until I really have any concrete evidence of where we're going, I think it'd be difficult for me to change anything.
Councillor Minsbound.
It's sort of a later agenda item. I just think it's something that perhaps we should put on our work plan for the autumn, Chair, because we know submissions are in by the autumn, so we're actually having a clearer picture and perhaps speaking to the senior officers in the council, saying, so what's the plan, including managing risk?
I think there's an open question, isn't there, about thinking about other councils and their internal audit teams. They will either have an internal audit team like we have, which is truly internal, or they will outsource that and have an internal audit team who is outsourced, or they'll have different levels of resourcing, I think Does anyone around the table have experience of a public sector merger, which is essentially what this is? Richard.
All I was going to say is that the timescales are impossible. That it's quite a ludicrous set of proposals in the timescales that are down, and that nobody here should expect to be an orderly handover. It will be, as it always is, and I've been through goodness knows how many, it will be chaos. So I just thought I'd warn you that an orderly handover, even between internal audit people, once you know the bare bones of it, it will be a horrendous job, really.
Sage and humorous, but frightening. It just makes me think that we should do our very best to be prepared. Councillor Meansbound.
I was going to say there's something, isn't it, that says that it feels like pre-due diligence, but it's that stuff that says it would be pretty easy to find out what our neighbouring authorities' internal audit regime is like, how quickly they put in any recommendations, or whether they've got huge lists of outstanding recommendations. And again, it's just understanding that, isn't it, that says, we can do some of that. And I think the autumn's a good time to do it. But there is something that says, as Richard says, we know suddenly the autumn might turn around and say, you've got to do everything now, and you haven't got time. And that's why I use the word prioritise, because we will be in a very pragmatic situation.
I think it's a great observation, and we will put that on the work programme for the autumn. And I think that, clearly the existing internal audit team is only resourced to do business as usual. But I think that there is a strategic question for, and I'm not quite sure who the question's for. It's a repeating theme tonight. With regards to what's the resourcing plan and or the due diligence plan and or the audit plan and or Adam's nodding as well, and I'm sure he's already got some thoughts and discussions on this. I guess the question really is, what is the role of this committee in that structure, and how much support does the executive and the cabinet want from this committee in that, and or how much do we poke our nose in? That's the balance, right? So, Councillor Isaac.
Yeah, just to say that we've raised this at the Resources Committee level, and we have an agreement from the Chief Executive to report to Resources after May, so that we can understand what's happening in regard to reorganisation, what preparations are being made, and so all these sort of pertinent questions can be directed at the Chief Executive at that time.
Thank you, John. Councillor Tustain.
I think as the Audit and Accounts Committee, I think we have a duty to make sure that this borough is as tidied up as possible. I think that's probably one of the best ways to put it, so that we've got our house in order. And then I think there is certainly, as members, we have a duty to potentially look outside to see, as Simon said, I wouldn't necessarily say that the pressure should be put on officers. They've got to do the operational stuff. That will come out in the operational reorganisation. But I do think we have a duty to our residents to make sure we do the work.
I think you're absolutely right, Jackie. I do think there's an opportunity, though, for us to take the lead to look over the fence. The data sharing exercise starts quite soon. It's the old adage with data is garbage in, garbage out, isn't it? And so it would be at least interesting to read some of the internal audit reports of other councils and see what they say. Adam.
Sorry, Chair. I was just going to add, I think Resources is probably the right place, but you are correct, Councillor Tustain, in terms of the transition and the accounts and that. Grant Thornton have done a few reports quite recently, which are quite helpful in terms of experiences of recent LGR, so that's worth a bedtime reading. And I was at the Society of District Council Treasurers meeting a couple of weeks ago, where Grant Thornton and others were there and discussing it. And again, it's all these sort of things, and I think you hit the challenge of delivering BAU is still the priority, but while we're also trying to do other things as well is a difficulty, and it's monitoring things like following up on recommendations from internal audit. If they're slipping, that is an indication of pressure on that. So that's probably something for this committee. But I think in terms of process towards LGR and that, if that's something that resources is going to consider from that sort of scrutiny perspective, that makes sense. But I think all of you as members obviously have a role on this committee as well as in council more generally.
Richard.
Just to confirm, well, say that's absolutely right. And I think the role of this committee is to maintain governance, proper governance and regulation for this authority right to the end, and not give up at that at any point, despite the various noises off, of which there'll be considerable numbers. But it's very important, I think, for you that you move into any new situation in a good position and with everything in order and completed as far as possible. And that ought to be your priority, really, over everything else.
Councillor Katecha, do you have a question?
Well, it's a suggestion more than anything. Could we have a committee where the audit committee and the resources committee basically have a joint committee meeting to sort this out, solve it, or start work on it, I should say?
I think I'm not sure what its terms of reference would be, or what that might be tackling. I think there's a clear distinction, isn't there, between, as we've been saying, the existing work of the business as usual and making sure that whatever organisation this committee's work is handed to in the future is handed over in the best shape and form possible. I think there is a bigger strategic question for the council, though, around experience of mergers and acquisitions, which, Adam, are you happy to share that paper that you from Grant Thornton? I'm not sure how many people will read it or it will be useful for, but I will do my best, and I'm sure others will too. I'm not sure, Councillor Katecha, that what we might be talking about doing there is creating something that would actually apply to a new organisation rather than this one. I don't know. Councillor Minispound?
I was just going to suggest, Chair, and I'm sure all the chairs have already thought about that. This is actually at your next chairs meeting, and actually having that as a big agenda item that says, okay, what are those strands of work and where do they get done, and how do we put that into our work programme that's either a change to BAU or it's an addition to, but we certainly have it programmed in and we have those regular conversations.
There is no chairs meeting that I'm aware of. No, and I think maybe we need to have one. I think that's not a bad idea at all. Councillor Isaac?
I'm told there is a forthcoming chairs.
Oh, I didn't get an invite.
No, well, nor have I. But I'm told that it's in the offing, but I haven't been told precisely when.
Okay, another action, Phil, for us to just follow up and find out what the next chairs meeting is and what's going on. I'm sure that the executive and the cabinet are already 2 or 3 steps ahead of us, but it would be useful to know where they are on that path. Councillor Tustain.
I think the difference is this is a regulatory and they are the scrutiny committee. So the scrutiny committee sit and look to see what needs to be scrutinised, because these are regulatory and therefore in the diary. So that's why they don't do chairs meetings, but obviously we can suggest things. I think Councillor Katecha, as you were saying there about bringing the two together, one would be a scrutiny committee and one would be obviously regulatory, and I think there would probably be constitutional issues, but obviously there could be discussion around, I don't want to use the task and finish because I think that's the wrong forum, but it would be something along the lines of some way of pulling those that are interested parties together that potentially might be relevant, and it might be a conversation with Fiona perhaps.
I think you're right, Councillor Tustain, but I am of the view that there's experience on this committee, in particular with regards to internal audit, whether that's officers or councillors, that I think we could, and it doesn't have to be this committee offering its services or the members of this committee, but I think that there's collective skills here that could be used by the council as part of the LGR planning, if you like. I don't know the answer to how that would be received or whether it's needed or anything. So we will follow that up after this and find out what the next steps are with some of those things. Councillor Tustain.
just potentially last thing I think, because obviously the plan of action towards LGR is obviously setting up the shadow unitary, isn't it? So that could be potentially the focus, because that will be interesting to get some more flesh on the bones around that, because I really don't kind of understand where that's going. That's definitely a very fuzzy crystal ball at the moment.
I think we're done with that item. Thank you, Paul. We need to approve your plan, don't we? That was the and the charter as well. So thank you for redlining the charter so that we can see where the changes were. It makes it incredibly easy. So I'll move from the chair. Does the committee agree to approve the internal audit charter 2025-26? Agreed. Marvellous. And does the committee agree to approve the internal audit plan 25-26? Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. I just was about to say thanks for the evening, but I note that you are the officer for item 9, review of corporate risk register. I'll ask you to introduce the report, please, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. So again, this report takes the normal format that the committee receives every 6 months. So I'll dive straight into paragraph 2.3, just gives you that diagrammatic version of the risk register. I just also wanted to highlight that paragraph 2.2, SLT agreed to a change in one of the risk scores, which is the cyber risk, which is detailed there. And they also included a new risk, which is at the top of page 103, which is provisional waste and recycling services, and the reference R11. So if you look at Appendix 1 on page 125, gives you the detail of that risk. So I wasn't going to add any more, Chair. So back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Isaac, you have a question?
Yeah. So it is about that new risk that's been identified following the proposed changes, or the planned changes to the waste and recycling services. Do I understand that the problem we've got is that we want to get ahead of things and order the vehicles, but the waste recycling vehicles, new vehicles that are going to sort of meet the new specification, but we don't yet know what the specification is for the new services, and so we're sort of caught between the devil and the deep blue sea on this.
I'm going to have to ask the technical expert on waste and recycling, because unfortunately I wouldn't be able to answer that one for you.
I think there's a lot of change going on with waste and recycling, and I think it's absolutely appropriate this is added as a new risk. So I welcome seeing that on there. I suspect there are many things that can go wrong. Where there's muck, there's brass. So I suspect if we get the muck wrong, there'll be expenses. I'll trust the officers to address the risks appropriately now that it's on the register. But Councillor Tusdane.
I was going to say, I wonder if it would be helpful if we got the relevant officer to break down, or for us to see, because obviously this would be a managed project, so to see what they're identifying as the key risk areas they've got, because this is very sort of lumped in a big bucket.
This is a strategic risk
It's a sort
review,
of
right? So it
is.
doesn't have the operational risks on it.
So yeah, so you're saying.
Where does that go, Adam? The operational risk register?
That would be for the service to manage all the project. So this is a project, so it's been managed by PMO, but it ultimately would be part of, it's considered as part of SLT meetings on a quarterly basis, with updates from the directors on sort of projects.
Thank you. Councillor Fillmore, you had a question?
Well, I was just commenting on the Councillor Isaac's concern, really. We're hardly ahead of things. We're one of the last councils in the country to undertake it.
Any other questions or observations on recycling?
And just a point of clarity, Chair. Are we going to get an answer to the question, what is the key risk that's being identified? Just to agree with Jackie, this is lots of words that mean big buckets, really. And if it's a new risk, I think it'd be really good for us to understand what it is exactly the risk that's been identified. I also understand that the officers with us tonight can't give us the answer, but to get it would be great.
Okay. Are you happy to take that away, Paul? Yeah? Thank you, Simon. Any other questions on waste or the risk there, or on cyber risk, actually, and the elevation of cyber risk from a critical impact to a potentially catastrophic impact, which actually I actually think is it's good to see that's been reviewed. And as I understand it from the pre-meeting with the officers, the core of the risk around this is really around the IT team's challenge in educating the council workforce to resist clicking on the wrong phishing emails and or staying ahead of the ever-present scammers. And councillors, true. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Paul. How could I forget? Councillor Meadersbound.
I'm only going to mention, this is probably the last time I mentioned local government reorganisation, maybe, because it just feels like it should be in here somewhere, not necessarily it as a risk, because I'm not sure it is a risk, but actually the impact of it probably could be.
Adam, do you have a view on that?
Just that it was discussed at SLT when Paul brought this along, and we did discuss the merits of doing that. I think at this time we considered it wasn't, because actually it's almost a risk for the new organisation. There are sort of internal operational risks around BAU and things like that, but again they really sit in individual service levels, service plans.
Councillor Conquest, did you have a question?
Not on LGR, but on the cyber risk. I noticed on the internal audit report that the IT critical systems are being audited every other year rather than every year, whereas this in here we're saying that there's a risk of catastrophic failure for the council. So perhaps that should be an annual audit.
I think that's a very astute observation.
The cyber risk audit is done every year. The critical systems is a separate audit to the cyber risk on the audit plan. We got two separate audits.
So the IT audit is split into two, basically.
Yeah.
One on a biannual cycle and one
yeah.
on an annual cycle.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Conquest, or do you think that we should perhaps revisit the audit plan we just agreed?
I think security goes across all systems, not just. I don't think you can isolate it quite like that.
It's slightly arbitrary allocation, I agree. Paul?
Just looking at the audit plan on page 99, information technology, critical systems, although I obviously slight error, I do have it in every year. My risk assessment is medium, but I have got it in every year. So I've allocated the critical systems audit every year.
So critical systems and cyber are both audited every year?
Yeah.
Okay. I've lost who had their hand up next. Councillor Tustin.
Although we talked about LGR, should we have or has devolution been considered in risk?
I don't know whether Paul's considered it. It wasn't discussed directly. I mean, it's kind of above. It's obviously for Hampshire County Council and the unitaries. We would be party off if we became a upper tier authority in whichever guise in future. But I don't know whether Paul's got a different view.
Same view as Adam.
Simon and I are looking at each other, and I'm not quite comfortable with that.
Yeah,
devolution is, devolution will impact the influence we have across the county before LGR happens, which will potentially impact the council. So I think it might need to be looked at.
Are you, Councillor Meadersbound?
I was just going to give us some flavour and colour to that. There's a reality, isn't there, that says if we look at what potentially could be impacted by a decision about devolution is anything to do with transport, anything to do with economic, inward investment, and we know we've got lots of issues that are absolutely, right to move forward, trying to progress, and there are all sorts of projects which could be paused by us, by central government, by the process, by external investors. I'm not sure. It feels like we put it in this very comfortable devolution. It's not scary, but actually the implications of it are huge to all sorts of things this current council is trying to achieve.
I think this committee should make a recommendation back to the SLT that they reconsider whether this should be on the strategic risk register. What they then do with it, and whether it just stays on there as a red, is another matter, and that's obviously executive decision for them to take. But I'm inclined to agree with most of the councillors around the table. We think that is a strategic risk. Paul?
Yep, we'll take that away.
I was talking to Adam and he's waving his finger at you.
No,
So-
sorry, I was busy
assuming
writing away. Sorry. sorry.
Okay,
Yep,
thank
we'll
you.
take that away.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this paper? In that case, does the committee agree the report has been considered, commented on, and do we note the contents of the report? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. I think that is your job done for the evening. And Richard, thank you. Thank you both for the hard work you put in on these papers as well. I will move on to the Treasury Management Report 24-25 Quarter 3, item 10 on the agenda, and I'll ask Adam Swain to introduce the report. Please, Adam.
Thank you, Chair. I will very briefly highlight this. This covers the period up to the 31st of December, so it's obviously a couple of months on from there. The executive summary on page 133 sets out performance. Forecast position is for income from Treasury Management to be 5.94 million this year, which is slightly above our budgeted position. And that's a return of 4.81%. I think as we get towards the year end, actually, we're likely to be a bit higher. I've seen figures today where actually might be nearer just over 6 million of income and 4.86%. And the context for that is the average base rate for this year has been about 4.95%. Section 9 sets out a couple of changes that have occurred since the end of December. One's around base rates again have fallen to 4.5%. And there's been confirmation that IFRS 9, which is an accounting standard that recognises unrealised gains or losses, where there was an override that's been extended for investments that were held before the 1st of April 2024. That extends the override to 2930, which means for the CCLA and the other bond fund that we hold, we don't have to recognise any gains or losses directly. There's a statutory override for that until at least the 1st of April 2029. But again, we didn't have any since then. And if we did enter into any other bond holdings, we would have to recognise any unrealised gains or losses in year. Happy to take any questions.
I will, if I may, Adam. Are either of those funds that you just mentioned that are still subject to the statutory override, are either of those the ones that are earmarked for our capital realisations for things like the Aquadrome?
No, they're the ones that the paper sets out that we've disposed of in year. So we've had a number that we have divested from as part of that, and invested into either sort of longer term gilts or supranational bonds, trying to fix and manage the interest rate decrease that we're expecting at the moment. So they're already covered. These ones we would probably continue to hold for a bit longer.
Richard Harper.
Sorry about this, but I'm intrigued by table 1 on page 134. It's your liquidity cash that intrigues me. It was 36 million March 24 and 43 million in December 24. I wonder whether you have a minimum level of liquidity cash that you would never go beneath. And I mean, it does indicate that a tremendous amount of turnaround in short-term investments, if I read these columns correctly, and it's getting increasingly difficult to deal in the short-term market. So I just wondered if you've got any observations on A, the level, and B, how you're going to maintain that going forward.
Yeah, we do have minimum levels set forward as a part of our cash forecasting, and I don't have those to hand at this precise second. Mark and my team manages that. As we get obviously towards the year end, income from things like council tax obviously decreases as most people pay that over 10 months, but we still obviously have the precepts to pay, so we do tend to hold a bit more in the latter quarter. And I agree, it is challenging to ensure sort of good rates of return, although money market funds have been quite stable recently, actually, which is kind of our main source of holding liquidity cash. And also we DMO and things like that as well, quite short term and quite good still. But yeah, we do recognise there is a kind of opportunity cost at the moment of in a decreasing rate environment.
Would be the minimum amount that you would regard as a real risk of having in liquidity?
I wouldn't suggest we'd go probably below 20 million at any time, but yeah.
Councillor Isaac, and then I'll go to Councillor Fillmore after that.
Yeah, it's a question for Adam about local government reorganisation and whether you are beginning to turn your mind to any implications in terms of treasury management that might be arising, and what you think the challenges or the requirements will be as we journey towards some sort of unitary authority, and what impact that might have on the way we manage our residents' treasury accounts.
I think the simple answer, and I think I've said it at this committee before, is I have a statutory duty for this council to ensure best value for this council for residents now, and continue with that and make the most appropriate decisions. Obviously, we don't know what the future looks like. We were talking about crystal balls and things like that at the moment. I can't comment on 3 years down the line on that. We will make the best decisions at the time within line with the strategy that was approved in February by council for the next financial year coming, and achieve the best returns that we can, while sort of having mindfulness of our sort of security of those investments, which is our top priority.
Next year's MTFS is going to be really interesting. I think that's all I can conclude from that, because at some point we have to keep the train running, and yet at some point we have to acknowledge that it pulls into the station. So I think it's a good question, John, but I think Adam's absolutely fair. We can't answer it yet. So, Councillor Fillmore.
Cheers. In context of the money market funds on page 145, this is just a question on the comparatively small investments of 4 amounts of 100 grand. I mean, it's not small to my budget, but I mean, in comparison with 22 million in money market and a total of 132, 4 investments of 100 seems quite small. Why would we be investing 100?
Again, that will just depend on limits within the kind of wider money market fund that we use, and kind of diversification of sort of our investments there. So they can be quite small. They can be zero, obviously, with some of those as well. There's a whole range in there. So it will just depend on availability at the time, as well, of when we're looking to purchase or sell.
I'm not seeing any further questions on this paper, so I will ask, does the committee agree to note the Treasury Management 2024-25 Q3 report? Noted, agreed. Thank you. That moves us on to item 11, Audit and Accounts Work Programme, which is on page 147. Officers have told me that they've already added to this since this paper was published. And we ran through manuscript what some of those additions might be. So we have Treasury Management Outturn Report for 2024-25 coming forward at our next meeting on the 23rd of June. And we have the Audit Committee's second annual report, which will come forward there as well. Adam reliably informs me that the Ernst & Young is planning to bring its audit plan to the June meeting. And they're actually targeting audit completion for November. So we're expecting the audit results to come to this committee in November. If that timeline slips, then we have a January and or a February meeting to cover that, and there's a backstop in place for February. So we're hoping to get that done nice and early this year, which would be good. The annual governance statement will come forward to the June meeting. And we've also got, we think we've got a property outturn paper, might come to June, it might not come till November, not quite sure yet. And 6 monthly property report will come to the September meeting. Again, that may be slightly early, may come to the meeting after that. So that's what we got ahead. We also have an opportunity to do some more training for the committee. So I've spoke to Adam and we're penciling that in for June. It's usually in 40 minutes, 45 minutes, is it, before this meeting starts? So what we'll typically do is start at sort of 5:30, and then 45 minutes, and then take a short break before we start this meeting. That's obviously optional, but it's always good to get a refresher on how local government accounts are jigsawed together. So that's all I plan to say on item 11, unless anyone's got any questions about the work plan going forward. No? Great. That just leads us on to the action tracking log at the back of the paper. We've added a good 5 or 6 actions tonight, so the list will become longer. But just running through those, action number 1 there was an update on the internal audit progress report, which was covered in tonight's report. So consider that one closed. And then we have item 2, which is where Councillor Chatburn raised a concern about emergency planning and business continuity. Since he raised that in November, he's not made it to the last couple of meetings, so I'm going to keep that on the list until he's back to make sure that he's happy with the reply that Katie Salis provided. Item 3, that is another internal audit progress report item about the business continuity steering group. Now that group has now been established and has now met for the first time, and so I'm planning to close that item as well. And item 4, that was done at the last full council meeting. And item 5, the process for the disclaimed audit opinions was discussed at full council. Also drew attention to the appendix item that is on the council website, which sets that out from SIPFA, and it's also in our minutes as well, but in more discursive form. So I think that's been covered off, and I plan to close that one too. I think, unless anyone has any AOB, that we're done for the evening. I'm looking around, I don't think anyone has, so I'll close the meeting at 7:38. Thank you everybody for your input tonight. Good meeting. Richard. That's fine. Okay, we'll make sure that